Hop Nation. I'm so grateful to have you tuning in, and I hope you aren't keeping us a secret and telling your friends and family. And please continue to tune in and check out our website, Hop Performance, that's hopperformance.com, where we'll have other insights as well as downloadable materials and extras from our guests. Now let me tell you a bit about this week's guest. A PhD and Professor of Management at the Silberman Global Faculty Fellow at Fairleigh Dickinson University, he's a national expert in work and family issues and the author of The Whole Person Workplace, Building Better Workplaces Through Work-Life, Wellness, and Employee Support. He's a featured speaker at the United Nations International Day of the Family and the White House Summit for Working Families. He's published over 30 academic journal articles and book chapters and presented it over 50 times at national and international conferences and won 8 awards for his teaching, research, and study to students. He's written for Harvard Business Review, Time, Fast Company, Success, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and he frequently appears in the media, including CBS, MSNBC, NPR, Fox News, Bloomberg Radio, as well as many business and parenting podcasts. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, thank you so much. I feel very impressive now. Thank you.
It is impressive. I mean, this is great. And I want to ask, kind of that founder story. Where did you develop this passion and inspiration to write this book and go in this path of, and this is your second book.
It's my second on this kind of topic. I'll get to that. But so for a long time, I've been a scholar and a professor in doing this kind of stuff since my dissertation work in 1999 on things like workplace flexibility and work life and how we can help employees rise to those challenges. And we were talking before the podcast about some of the struggles that academics sometimes have in having practical impact. So after I got like tenure and promotion and the whole works, I kind of had like a mid-career crisis, I call it. And, I decided I really wanted to pivot and do like public facing work that really worked with companies, worked with working parents and employees directly to get them really good information on rising to work-life challenges. And that started with, now many years ago, with a blog actually to help working fathers with work-life balance. And that turned to my first book, which is the Working Dad's Survival Guide, which is still the only first and only book of advice and encouragement for dads trying to balance work and family. And then I pivoted again to saying, well, yes, working parents need good information. And I focused on dads because A, I'm a dad, and B, there's a lot of resources out there for women. I mean, not that we really support women in the workplace as we should, but there's information and people working on it. And there was just a lack of information and resources for men trying to do this. And half the parents are fathers. So it seems like there's a need for that. But then after that, I was like, well, employers really need good information on helping their employees with their work-life challenges. And that led to a lot of professional work and speaking and workshops and things like that. And then has culminated in the book that came out just this past summer called The Whole Person Workplace, which in itself is kind of an interesting story of development because I started writing it in late January of 2020. And my idea was it was going to be very focused on working parents. And the conclusion was going to be, hey, why don't we let people work from home every now and then? Of course, then March 2020, happens, right? The realization of COVID kind of swept over the world, and it really transformed the workplace. So I lined up all these interviews for April, May, and June of 2020, and I kept them all. So I was speaking to chief human resources officers and CEOs and small business owners right when they were grappling with the height of what are we going to do with this?
And it wasn't because you were a savant and saw this coming.
Yeah, no, but it provided, listen, it's not a good thing in any way, shape, or form, but in terms of my interviews and the information I was able to get, talking to people as they're trying to figure out how do we help our business survive and how do we help the real people, the whole people who work for us get through this crisis, was an amazing education. And I was able to really chronicle a lot of that in the book, which is a rare thing. Books don't, books with the lead time of books aren't usually kind of in the middle of something that's going on. It's usually kind of after the fact. So, gave me an opportunity to see how workplaces were changing, how people were thinking about workplaces were changing. And that led to a broader book that talked about how can employers, managers, leaders, HR people value their employees as whole people as a way to support people, A, through this crisis, but B, in general, and also by doing so, creating cultures and flexible, sustainable organizations that can get through crises and that can really thrive as opposed to playing catch up in these situations.
Absolutely. And I talk about this in my own research and work, that even in behind the tasks and the projects and all those KPIs that corporations like to point to, whether it's the financial ones of revenue, margin, profitability, or culture, in behind all of it is people that drive those results. And this idea of the whole person, where the gray line between our personal lives and work lives that has always existed kind of has dissolved the past 2 years, and now it looks more like a plate of spaghetti. So we have to look at this and quit trying to have them as two separate spheres of life, because they overlap and they either support or they become a saboteur.
That's very well said. Yeah. So I think there's always been, right, work and life. Work is a part of life, right? And so it's hard to really fully separate them. But I think for a lot of people in business, they wanted those to stay separate, right? Or leadership wanted, don't let anything come in between you and work, right? So keep all that separate. But, I think ironically, when many people didn't come to the workplace and instead were looking at people's living rooms and their dogs and their kids in the background and everybody's juggling, I think about, remember back, a year and a half ago, schools were not in person. There was not daycare over the summer or camps, that summer. So everyone who was a working parent was literally juggling work and life in real time in front of all their colleagues with their managers, juggling just like everybody else. And I think that blew up the fake wall between kind of work and life. And it led to that realization again, that it's hard to have somebody really be focused and engaged and fully there at work if they have all this life stuff hanging over their heads, right? So if you're worried about health issues, or you're that you have an appointment that you really have to rush, you have to finish this work so you can get to that appointment for your mother's meeting with the doctor with her declining condition, or you're dealing with the frustration of not having enough time for life, or whatever it might be. We all have stuff, right, from life that hangs on us, right? We all have stressors and anxieties and responsibilities and priorities. And as an employer, a lot of employers took the coward's way out. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but they were like, we don't care about that. Just take care of your work. But that doesn't lead to great workplaces. And great workplaces, I think the employers value their employees not as a part of the machine, but as a whole person, including their things outside of work that are important to them in their lives. And if you think about it that way, now you as an employer, manager, or HR director, or whoever, can start saying, well, what can I do to support the whole people that work for me? How can I help them rise to some of their life challenges? And if you do that, you make the lives of your employees better. And that's a good end result in and of itself. But you also create a workplace where people can come focused, energized, people are grateful, people pay it forward, and you create this culture of mutual care as you go. And it just, if I could, and then, how you express that value, that we value employees as whole people, is going to depend on who you are, what your company is, your budgets, who your people are, what's appropriate for your situation. So the book is not like, here's the 3-step formula.
Right.
The book really is like, here's the philosophy that we need to value employees as whole people, and here's why that's important. And then I kind of go through a lot of different thought processes, right? Or a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that you might consider
considerations for
or making decisions around. And they can be really big things. So large companies, you can invest in large wellness programs, and you could transform your performance management, and you could really go to like really supporting remote work and things like that. Smaller companies or in-person places, and I interviewed large multinationals like BASF and Adidas and Microsoft, and then literally a local grocery store with like 14 mostly part-time employees and everything in between. And I really wanted to cover blue collar, white collar, all these different types of workplaces to show that like you can apply this in any situation because it's a thought process and then decisions that are right for you. So if I could give one example from a big company, one from a very small.
That would be great. Just how they were able to demonstrate that value to the people as a whole person.
Yeah. So in Europe, Adidas was opening a new facility, and to start staffing up, they were transferring employees from some of their other cities where they operated. But they thought ahead a little bit, and think about that. If you're being uprooted from living in one place to moving to another place where you might not have your network and resources behind you, especially if you're maybe a parent with younger children. So Adidas thought ahead, and they just booked ahead for the summer camps for the kids of the people who are transferring in. And just think about that, right? I mean, that's not very difficult to do. That took just time, consideration, empathy, what might help these people. And that eased the transition because it's one less thing they have to worry about when they're moving to this new town.
And what message did that send to those people moving?
Yeah,
they actually did that.
We care about you. We want to relieve one of those things that's weighing you down, like a backpack. We're taking something out of that backpack that kind of frees you up, right? And now you can feel a little better about this transition because your kids are going to be taken care of. And probably that means when you show up to work, you're better able to focus on work instead of being like, well, what am I going to do with my kid? And, do I have to leave early? Do I have to blah, and then, one of my favorite stories, this actually was something I observed personally a long time ago, was I was in a co-ed softball team when I was in graduate school, kind of a high, not just a beer league, but like, this good league. And one of my teammates, she was a Division I athlete in college, and she graduated, and now she's on this team, but she just got a job. And she was telling us that she went through all these interviews and her onboarding. And in that onboarding, they really got to know her as a person. And they found out about our team and how important this team was to her to connect her to her athletic backgrounds and things like that. So after one game, we go to the bar afterwards. And when we're going to settle the bill as a team to the waitress said, nope, the bill has been taken care of by, and it was her manager. And with the signal, right? What does that communicate? That communicates that we care about this person. And this is completely divorced from the workplace, right? This is not, we care about this person for what she could return to us in the workplace. This is, we care about her, even in a priority that she has that's not really related to work at all. Because we care about her. She's part of us now.
And when we feel that as individuals, our level of commitment to the organization and the work we do goes up a notch.
Yeah. And I think, it's easy for a lot of employers to say, we value our employees because we're going to get a return on that investment. That's good. That's better than not trying to take care of people. But it's better to care about the people who work for you as whole people, regardless of the return of that gesture or the program or the decision that we make.
Right. And not doing it from that manipulative stance, but as
right. It's not just a return on investment equation. Right. It's because we care about the people who work for us. And if you do that, you make people's lives better. You make it easier for them to thrive and feel better about their lives and rise to their own challenges. So that's why I think, some people are really feel like remote work, work from home, hybrid workplaces, which I know we're going to talk about in a little bit, really suit a lot of people because they can construct their time around some of their other life challenges, which is probably the single best thing we could do, is give people a little more autonomy and choice over their time, focus on their performance, not like time spent and stuff like that. And that allows them to construct like custom fit solutions for themselves, right? So if there's one thing a company could do, or an employer could do, or a manager could do, I would recommend that probably everybody can use a little more choice and autonomy over their time. And that frees them up to rise to their challenges. Now, beyond that, there's 100 things we could do probably if we get creative about it and listen to the needs of our employees.
Yeah, and it reminds me of Daniel Pink's research when he wrote Drive, because he talked about autonomy, which with the choice and opportunities for growth, as well as appreciation and that purpose in what we're doing. And we've been talking about the remote workforce. There's, people say, oh, we're going to go back to, normal at some point. I'm going, no, we're forever changed, because as much as there's been a lot of unpleasantries through this experience, we've also been able to get exposed to a lot of things that we can do better and some new benefits to remote work. So what do you see as the future of remote workforce, or the future of the workforce? Because we're already seeing the idea around commercial real estate changing and that, but this remote workforce where people can work from anywhere. And then it's there's a two-part question here, because there's a future of remote work, but also the paying people for performance rather than just what I call attendance or time.
Yeah. So great. There's a couple of things here. So first off, it would be a real shame, right, if no lessons were learned and applied through these last 2 horrible years where we've had to really adjust everything. And I think in the emergency response of the first couple of months of dealing with the pandemic, I think a lot of employers are like, let's just put some temporary things in and then we'll get back to life as normal. But I think that, as you said, I think we've learned stuff along the way. So let me first say, there is a whole segment of the workforce in the world where people do have to be at a particular place at a particular time to work, right? So maybe for them, it's not remote work, but maybe it's greater consideration of, helping them in terms of having more flexible scheduling or more certainty in their scheduling, and, better consideration for their physical, psychological, and mental well-being. There's lots of things we could do to support employees who cannot go remote. But your question was about the remote workforce, so let's go to that.
And that's key, because things like manufacturing or shipping and logistics, there's just certain things where people need to be there to.
Right, but there's no reason we can't support them in lots of ways. It's just
Bingo.
The time autonomy is not one of them, or place autonomy is not one of them. So we need to think about our whole workforce. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But for people who can work remotely, I don't think very many companies are going to go everybody back to the workplace all the time. And I don't think that many are going to be like everybody's all remote all the time either. I think most are going to land somewhere in the middle. And it could be most people can work remotely most of the time, or it could be most people are going to be here most of the time. And that's okay. It's what's appropriate for your workforce and their needs and for what your company does. But I think 2 things, so some degree of hybridization, whether that's like people have choice where they talk to their managers or their teams decide like when we're going to be together and when we can work remotely, or if it's just going to be kind of that schedule where I know a lot of companies are like, everybody come in Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and you can work remotely, Tuesdays and Fridays, which, at least saves people commuting time and maybe gives them ways to be like, well, okay, so on these days we're together, we can schedule certain things. These days when we're apart, we could work more appropriately, right? It leads to a little more certainty in that. So those are two things that I think most organizations are going to do. But I think even the ones that want to get most people back are going to be much more open to ad hoc and informal flexibility. The whole like, I need to be home early this day for a family thing or for my kid's school or for a doctor's appointment, and I can make up the work at some other time or at home or whatever. Or, I need to go 4 hours away to where my parents live to help them move into the elder care facility. And I need to be there for 2 weeks. I'll bring my laptop and I'll stay working during that time.
Right. And I think the environment has created that empathy and understanding for those situations that didn't exist kind of across the board before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think it made it more acceptable to build in that flexibility and empathy systematically.
Yeah. So you're exactly right. So in one hand, what the managing through the pandemic has done is given people more empathy to these situations. And also it's proven to people who were reluctant to allow remote work or flexible work before, be like, you know what? It's been working, right? Like we're still here. So I can allow some more of this. So I think, it is funny. So the first version of my book was going to conclude with, let's have more informal and ad hoc flexibility. And the world has gone past that now, which I guess I'm pleased to see. And so I think even in companies that are going to be more back to 2018 ways of working, they're going to retain the empathy and the realization that at least informal or ad hoc flexibility is what we can do that. And that's great. And if that's, that in and of itself is fantastic. Now, many companies, and I profiled two that went fully remote well before the pandemic, and others that had built in a lot of flexibility ahead of time, they were 10 steps ahead when the pandemic hit. Whereas other organizations that were very command and control, and we need to see you working or else we don't know if you're working, they were 10 steps behind during the transition. Mm-hmm. And, all the news about the Great Resignation over the last 6 months, I think a lot of employees are like, well, how was I treated during this emergency? What did this say about the values of my employer? And maybe I'm going to look for an employer that is more considerate of these types of things. And I think that's a big driver of the Great Resignation. So, that really goes there. And it goes to your second part of your question, which is about what, we hire somebody to do a job, to perform work. We don't necessarily, again, there are certain jobs where we pay them for time, for being in a particular place at a particular time.
Right.
Many professional jobs, time is very secondary. So why are we so worried about time as opposed to productivity or whether people are hitting their goals or their benchmarks? And smart companies reposition their performance management around this. And companies that are stuck in 1970s thinking still want people to have chair time and things like that. And one company that I profiled throughout the book is Ryan, which is a tax services firm out of Dallas. They have a few locations now. They transformed themselves pre-COVID from really actually one of their employees in their employee survey before they made the transition said it's a really energetic, highly skilled sweatshop. And literally, when they did performance reviews, the first thing they did, they sorted the billable hours of their employees on an Excel spreadsheet. And that was the primary way they measure performance. And thankfully, they wound up transforming this over several years. It took to really transform the culture around this. But they were like, now our performance management is, we track on a continuous basis. Every employee and their managers can go into an intranet, like in their workplace, and see progress towards goals and see what the revenue is if you're a revenue producer, or see what your, management by objective goals are if you're not. And if you're a manager, there's another line or two about, how good of a manager you are. There's a little bit about 360-degree feedback to see how your team feels. And there's client satisfaction. And this is all tracked continuously. And basically the deal that Ryan said to their employees is, listen, as long as you're good on your metrics, we don't care where, when, how you work. Coordinate with your manager and your team about like how you're going to work together. But by and large, we don't care. Just do. And it, in every way, this organization could have gotten better. It did. They went from like a 32% turnover rate. Now they have a turnover rate around 3 or 4%. Their
Wow.
CEO rated by Glassdoor this past year as the #2 most effective CEO through the pandemic. They had employee engagement scores in the 60s before the transition, and their employee engagement scores, they're 96% right now. And the CHRO who I interviewed for the book is like, we're obsessed with that last 4%. I presume they're going to work on that. And just every indicator from clients are happier, employees are happier. The firm growing like crazy. They're on the Fortune 100 list of best companies to work for. Every indicator has been supercharged by the fact that they gave their employees the gift of being able to structure their time around their life concerns. And the thing is, it's funny. So the former CHRO, who I'm very good friends with, she was on the CEO to like, change this, we need to change this. And the CEO was like, no, that's flex, that's soft, I don't want this. And then one day, and this is kind of the animating story in the introduction to the book, this young up and coming professional in the firm, she comes to the CEO's office with her resignation letter and a tear in her eye, saying, I'm about to start a family. I don't see how I can make that work while working here, but I love this company. It's such a shame, but here's my resignation. And the CEO, it became personal. It's like, you know what? He turns back to my friend. It's like, do it all. I don't want to lose anyone like her ever. And actually that employee stayed because of the promises made and is still there. And this is like 12 years later, 13 years later, and doing a great job and is a leader now in the company. And so it's funny. So like some people ask me in these interviews, so how do you convince people who are reluctant? Well, some people respond to the data, and I provide some in the book, and others like really respond to anecdote and sentiment, and it has to hit them in the heart.
And the emotional connection.
So it depends on your situation. If you're trying to advocate for this in your workplace, you need to figure out what's most persuasive to do this.
Right. And now we've been talking about this and, anecdotally, but I want to talk about the biggest issue for every company. And I mean, if I think of the thousands of companies that I've had touch points with in the past, 3-4 years, attraction and retention of talent's the number one thing in any organization and field. Number one.
Yeah.
And, the war on talent is hidden headlines all the time, but the approach and what you're talking about here, can you specifically hit on kind of the reducing turnover or attrition, and that attraction of creating a workplace that people are drawn to work for, but also that increased employee engagement and bringing that purpose and meaningfulness to the work they're doing that's at a deeper level than just time for dollars?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I work at a university, and I have been launching, I'm the head of our human resources undergraduate major. And so I've been launching, young HR professionals out for a long time now in younger generations. And I can tell you almost all of them really want to work for a company that reflects their own priorities and values, which is maybe a little different than 10 or 15 years ago, where people just were like, I want a job. And so there's a lot more, like if you want to hire good, recent college grads, you have to not just show that you're a good workplace and can develop their career, but that you stand for something. And that's how you're going to get, stand out in a very crowded, very difficult labor market for employers right now, right? And that goes back to the great resignation things. But, companies that have great reputations, they can't hire enough people. Like there's so many people are, applying for them and things like that. And then you see places struggling to be able to staff up.
It's become a real point of differentiation for companies
Absolutely.
too, like where every product or service can be commodified.
Yeah.
It really, to me, it comes down to the people and the culture is
Yeah.
going to be what separates organizations looking forward. And
Yeah.
if they don't realize that now, they're going to be the fate of a a Blockbuster or
Right.
the dinosaur.
Yeah. So, I mean, but that's the attraction part of it, right? And there's lots of research that shows this. One of the companies I profile is, you might have heard of Gravity Payments. This guy, Dan Price, he put in a $70,000 minimum salary in his company about 5-6 years ago, because he didn't want anybody to really struggle to like make ends meet. And, there's an upfront cost to that in terms of compensation, but his voluntary turnover is almost zero. The company is growing by leaps and bounds. They get more applications than, they get, 90 applications for a position. They actually have more clients or potential clients than they can handle right now, and they're trying to grow and to meet that. Not only was it the right thing to do in his minds, it really supercharged their ability to attract, select, and retain really great employees. So the attraction part's a big part of it. The selection part is also a big part of it. I think we need to build in this value base into how we hire employees and look for people who would thrive in a workplace where it's a little more collaborative, where it's a little more mutually supportive. We can ask questions about this, tell me about a time you supported an employee through a coworker through a difficult time, or, tell me about how you would lead with values in a given situation. We could look at things like, a growth mindset or emotional and things like that would really fit a whole person with culture. We build that into our hiring. We could do that. We could do that how we recruit and all these other things too. How we onboard employees. It shouldn't just be here's your desk and fill out this paperwork and here's your laptop. Your onboarding should be about your values and about getting someone into the workplace and then like introducing them, building their internal network of people who will be supportive of them. And there's lots of creative, great ways we could do that, that really demonstrate our values up front. And then it's much more likely that people will reflect these values, buy into them, and perpetuate them going forward. And then finally, in terms of retention, I think the data are there about turnover rates and things like that. But think about the cost. So you have a good employee who's been with you for a little while and they leave. Think about all you lost, right? You probably put a lot of investment and development in them for a while. You've lost all that. Their internal networks about how you get things done informally and maybe outside of the organization chart, you lose that. Their external networks and who they know and who they can bring in and all that, you lose that. All that tacit, knowledge about how things get done, and you lose that. If they're the point person on a client, there might be a ball dropping, during that.
You could lose the client.
Yeah, the client. So there's discontinuity of service to a client, right? Then somebody leaves temporarily before you rehire somebody. Other people need to fill in, so they're getting burned out and overworked. Then you have to go through the recruitment, hiring, onboarding, training, and it probably takes another year before they can step in and be as effective as a person had. So the cost of turnover is just extraordinary, and it leads to all this activity just to catch up, as opposed to using that activity to get ahead. And so I think that, if you build a whole person workplace, a workplace where people are valued as whole people, not just as a part of the machine, you build a workplace culture where, you're going to attract talent. You're going to be able to hire the talent that works best for you. You're going to be able to develop them and keep them for a long time. And that's whatever your strategy is, whatever your industry is. I can't think of anything else that would predict your success better than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're speaking to the converted, because that's, literally my thesis and work as well. So, and that's why I wanted to get you on here, because this is solid stuff.
Yeah, if I could just jump on this one more time. That sounds big, that sounds difficult. That sounds like a big mountain to climb. You start with listening, right? What are the needs of my employees? What are the needs of the employees I'd like to attract? And then, you be creative about it. You could do this on any budget. One company I talked to, they had for a long time a 9 a.m. like everybody together, all hands meeting. And there was this one employee who had 3 different morning drop-offs for 3 different children. And it was stressful for this person to get to work at 9. It was always watching the clock. And think about it, wake up at 6 and it's on your, oh my God, I have to get all these kids ready, this and blah, 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 right? And they were not the only one who was stressing about this. But he finally just said hey, it's really stressful for me to being on the clock for 9 o'clock. Is there anything we can do about this meeting? And the manager's like, yeah, of course, let's move it to 10. And now we move meetings to 10, and think about all the collective anxiety and stress that was released. How better is someone's life if they're not waking up in the morning with a pit in their stomach and I got to get everything done on time, right? And so there you go. That costs nothing, 0. Now building a world-class wellness program or providing 16 weeks of paid parental leave and the supports around that, there's a cost to that, right, up front. It probably pays off in the medium to long term, but it depends on where you are, and so there's ways you can become a whole person workplace on any budget, and ways just making those decisions. And if you're the leader of an organization or an HR where you can really shape policies, programs, think about that from that point of view. But if you're a team leader, a supervisor, the head of a department, within your sphere of influence, you could make things better just through your informal decision making and how you handle situations and how you get to know your employees and understand what kind of supports they need. So it sounds like a big thing to transform into a whole person workplace, but it really, any manager, anyone with a sphere of influence in a workplace can move in that direction. And it doesn't have to cost a ton of money to do that.
I like that.
Doesn't have to, for New Moon Natural Foods with 2 stores in California, they have different things they can do because they know all of their 60 employees. And then the large corporation, what BASF does is they build a constellation of programs where everybody feels like there's things they can fit into and be supported. Different, it manifests itself in different ways. The important thing is to have a set of values that you then use as a basis for deciding.
Absolutely. And for driving the culture you want to become and realizing that, like Ryan, they were where they're at, but where they ultimately wanted to be, and keeping the eye on that ball. Absolutely. Not worrying about the current state. It's moving towards and being aspirational with intention. Now, I want to personalize some of this for you because I want to respect your time because I know you have some other commitments coming up too, Scott. This is a question I love to ask all my guests, but what are some of your success principles? Because you have, your academic life and teaching and leading a department. You have your writing and publishing and keynotes and consulting to industry. And you have a family life that you obviously value based on the principles of your research and writing. What are your 3 success principles you would like to share with, working parents in particular, but, I'll broaden it. But as a working dad, I'd love to hear at least one of those 3 being, a working parent.
Well, I think you had, we planned this question, so I had a little bit of time to think about it. But I think the 3 things I'm going to say apply to everything, whether you're a manager or a leader. As an academic, how I deal with my students now, which is different than how I dealt with my students 15 years ago, I think. And then in your family life, I think it's the 3 success principles would be listening, empathy, and creativity. Okay, so really listening, understanding what the needs of the people you're dealing with are, asking good questions, listening, not just presuming to know what people want. And that means, listen, I have a 16-year-old son right now. What he needs now is different than when he was 6. You need to listen and understand people where they are. And, you might have 2 different employees in 2 different places in their lives. They each need different things. You need to listen to them, differently and equally. And so that listening really is the first thing. And then empathy. So I used to be a little more, and I was always a fairly caring professor, I think. But I was very much like, if this thing's late, forget it, you're done, and things like that. And I've become much more empathetic. And I think much like we were talking about, workplaces have gotten more empathetic. My students have struggled a lot over these last 2 years. And you think about what students have lost. I'm much more empathetic, and not that I lower standards, but I'm more flexible about a lot of other things. And I just, you got to realize that, people are dealing, I used a metaphor quickly before about this backpack of stressors, right? So everyone's carrying this like invisible backpack. Someone explained this to me. It's a great metaphor with all this other stuff we carry, right? And that weighs us down and makes life harder, makes work harder, makes school harder. If we're empathetic about it, maybe we think about, how can I take something out of their backpack, and make it lighter for them. And, for a student, that might mean, listen, a lot of my students, and I think a lot of college students, we think about Yale students and blah, blah, blah when we think about college, but most college students work at least part-time. Many of mine work full-time and go to school full-time. A lot of them are first in their families to go to college. They don't have a ton of money behind them. There's a lot of pressure on them to succeed and lift their families up. And they carry that. And, is it so important that, I can't give somebody an extra day or 2 because their boss just, made them come into work an extra day? No, it's not that important. So the empathy, I think, is really important. And in your family life, empathy is super important. And I think in your managerial life, that's what it takes to be a really good manager is, again, having some empathy and understanding for what other people might be going through. And thirdly, creativity. So, I've come to this philosophy that no can't be the first answer. Maybe no is the ultimate answer, right? If somebody asks for an accommodation or being able to work flexibly, or, if a student needs to take courses out of sequence, or in your family, and something,
right,
your son or daughter wants to do something, your spouse or whatever. Sometimes there's a reflective, no, this isn't how we do things, so no. Or no, this doesn't fit the structure, so no. And so I'm now of the position that no isn't the first answer. Maybe we can't quite get there. Maybe we can't figure it out. Maybe it has to be no. But at least let's think about it creatively, and think about, like, how can we make this work? Can we adjust this student's schedule so they're out of sequence, but they'll be okay? Can we adjust something in the workplace that we haven't done before? And why not? And what resources might it take for this to work? Again, one person I interviewed for the book, she had talked about, she was an HR executive, but she talked about when she has family back in Europe, her mother fell ill. They said, go to your mother, bring your laptop, we'll get you a VPN and an international phone, and go and just continue to work while you're there. And she's like, they could have said no, like, we can't have you for 3 months somewhere else. But they didn't start with no. They said, okay, like, we listened to your concern. We had empathy for your situation. And now let's find a creative solution that makes it work. And, she literally said, quote, why would I ever work anywhere else? And, that's kind of what we want, right, as employers. So listening, empathy, and creativity, I think, would be my 3 success principles.
I love it. And that's a perfect way to kind of bring it all together. And I want to thank you, Scott, for your time and contribution in this space. It is a unique spin on kind of the collective wisdom that's out there. And you've done it from that evidence-based approach, which, resonates with me, and from that pracademic mindset that we were talking about beforehand. So for those that don't have the book already, we will make sure we include the links to all the books. And is there anything else that you would like to say or
Yeah.
promote as next before we sign off?
Right. So first off, if you liked what you've heard today, The Whole Person Workplace by Scott Behson, Behson. While you're listening to it, if you're on your computer or your phone, go right to Amazon or wherever you buy books and put it right in. Beyond that, if you want to go to scottbehson.com, SCOTTBEHSON.com, you can see links to a lot of my other work and things like that. I've recently begun a LinkedIn newsletter. So every 2 weeks, I'm going to be updating this with new information, little cases of organizations that have figured parts of this out, focusing on one theme or another. And so if you can find me on LinkedIn, again, Scott Behson, SCOTTBEHSON, I'll have this regular newsletter that has just started. So those are great ways to connect with my work. And again, I'm super accessible. If you'd like me to, talk to your work team, or you want to, I've had a couple organizations where their HR department just was like, we're going to read this book this month. And then they called me and was like, hey, can you come at the end of the month and talk to us? And I'm super happy to do that because I want to build workplaces that work for everybody. And that's kind of my mission in life right now. And so if I can help you do that, please reach out.
Sounds good. We'll make sure to include the links
Yep.
in the show notes and that right up front for everyone to make it very easy, because in this busy world that we're all in, the easier we can make, for taking action on something, the better it's going to be. So thank you, Scott, for your time. All the best over the holidays to you and the family and everyone else in your life.
All right. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you, Hop Nation, for tuning in this week for another wonderful episode. And if you haven't already, again, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us, and share with friends. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.